coming. So this is me. I am a developer on the OpenSSL project. I've been working full-time on that now for about 5 years or so. And, well, you can read that. That's about me. So safe to say I'm fairly well involved in OpenSSL. I like this picture. It kind of demonstrates to me the pitfalls of security. So, I'm going to be talking quite a lot about cryptography today, and it's easy for people to sort of focus in on that and think, well, you know, I've encrypted my data, job done. You know, and obviously it's not as simple as that. Your security is only as secure as your weakest link. So, you know, the cryptography is like the barrier in the road, and everyone just drives past it when you don't patch your servers and you keep your keys under the mat and stuff like that. So that's just a sort of caveat really before I get into cryptography and OpenSSL and all that sort of stuff. So when we think about secure communications, there's really sort of 3 aspects that we're mainly interested in. So confidentiality. So if I'm sending data, can anyone who's not supposed to be able to read it, can they get access to it, can they read it? Integrity, which is all about, if I send a message, is the message that received the same one that I sent, or has it been tampered with in any way? And finally, authentication. So that's, when I've received a message, is it from the person that I think it's from? So those are the sort of 3 aspects that we're mainly focused on when we're talking about communications. OpenSSL is it's a toolkit. It provides you various tools for doing cryptography and for securing your communications. And there's a whole bunch of tools that cryptography provides us to help us achieve those 3 principal goals: confidentiality, integrity, and authentication, CIA. So for confidentiality, we have encryption. That's fairly obvious, most people know about that one. Integrity, we have something called MAX, message authentication codes. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, a slide on that. And for authentication, we have digital signatures. And again, I've got a few slides just to describe that. And then there's a bunch of other things that we can also use to help us in implementing these 3 things. So we need to have secure random numbers, because lots of the algorithms that we use, they need to have good random data. Hash functions, key agreement, so it's all very well being able to encrypt data, but if both parties don't have the same key, that doesn't help. And how do you get those keys to the people who need them without other people finding out what those keys are? So let me start with encryption. Pretty simple really in concept. We just want to prevent an eavesdropper from reading our messages, and we just take our message, which we call the plain text, scramble it, encrypt it, send it to the other party, and then they decrypt it at the other end. So it's called plain text before it's encrypted, and then ciphertext once it is encrypted. I'm talking mainly here about what we call symmetric encryption. So that means that the key is the same on both sides of the communication. There is another type of encryption where the key is not the same. I'm not really talking about that today. Encryption as a concept has been around for thousands of years. Julius Caesar used encryption. So there's a thing called the Caesar shift cipher. People heard of that? Yeah? Okay, most people nodding. So this is really simple encryption. And you take your alphabet, 26 letters, and each letter gets shifted by a certain number of positions. So that the key here is knowing the number of positions that the letters shift. So if the key is 3, then we're shifting 3, so A goes to D, B to E, and then at the end we wrap around, so X goes to A, Y to B, Z to C. And that gives us encryption like this. Obviously the big flaw with this is there's only 25 keys, and that's not going to take you very long to crack that encryption. Paper and pen, a few minutes, you'd be able to figure it out. So obviously that's not going to cut it in today's world. So these days we use modern encryption standards. By far the most widely deployed encryption is known as AES, the Advanced Encryption Standard. Used everywhere. There are a few parts of the world where it's less popular. So if you're in China, say, then you might not be so keen on AES because it was developed by the Americans. So they have their own standards. But aside from a few local areas, everyone uses this. It's what we call a block cipher. So in AES, the block size is 16 bytes. So that means that we can only encrypt 16 bytes, that's all it does. Let 16 bytes in, encrypts it, and 16 bytes out. That's all AES does. Which actually isn't particularly useful in itself, because normally you've got more or maybe less than 16 bytes and you have to go to cope with that. Key size, okay, so these are shift ciphers, we have 25 different keys. With AES, you've got a choice. You can have 2 to the power 128, 2 to the power 192, or 2 to the power 256 different keys. So that's 128 bits, 192 bits, or 256 bits. That's a lot of keys. That's a really lot of keys. Almost all.
Would that be AES 128 at the left end and AES 256 in terms of the name they use?
Exactly, yes. Yeah. So if you hear AES 128, it means AES with 128-bit key. Not to be confused with the block size. So 16 bytes is 128 bits. The block size is always 128 bits, whether you've got 256-bit key or 128-bit key. You'll always encrypt 16. Okay, so that's great, but how do you encrypt something which is bigger than that? Any ideas? How would you do it?
Encrypt a block at a time?
Encrypt a block at a time. Great. So you've got, I don't know, 10 meg file, take the first 16 bytes, you encrypt it, onto the next 16 bytes, encrypt that, etc., etc. Okay, you could do that. This is a bitmap image, and we've done that. That's what's happened. We've gone through each 16 bytes and encrypted it individually, and that's what it looks like when it's encrypted. That's not great because you can obviously see the structure. It's obviously scrambled, it's not quite as nice and neat as the original, but you can look at that and you can kind of tell what it is. Yeah? So that's not really good. Any ideas as to why that's happened? Yeah.
Is it because you're encrypting the same type of data? So the black pixels and the other black pixels are going to encrypt the same data?
Exactly, exactly. So when you encrypt something, if you've got the same plain text and the same key, then the output is going to be the same. So all the white bits in the image will encrypt to the same value, and all the black bits will encrypt to the same value. So that's why you can see the outline, because you're copying the structure effectively. The same things result in the same output. So we need to somehow deal with that. So on top of AES or any block cipher, then we have this concept of a mode. So that mode gives you the ability to basically encrypt any size that's appropriate. There are some specialist modes as well, which do other things, but most general purpose modes, that's what they're there for. It's for encrypting arbitrary size data. So this is a particular mode. This is called CTR mode or counter mode. So the way this works, we don't encrypt the data directly. What we do is we have a counter, which starts at 0. So that might be, I don't know, 8 bytes counter. And then you have what we call a nonce, which is a number used once. So we pick a nonce, which must be unique. So maybe we have an 8-byte nonce and an 8-byte counter. Stick them together. 16 bytes. That's what we encrypt. Okay? So that gives us a bunch of random data, 16 bytes of random data on the output. Then we take that and we XOR it with our plaintext. And that's the ciphertext. Okay? Then we go on to the next block and we increment the counter by 1 and we repeat the process. Okay? And so on to increment it again to the next 16 bytes and again and again and again. So what that means is, even if you use the same plaintext, the output from AES will be different every time. It will be like a stream of random bytes. And so the ciphertext is different even if the plaintext is the same, as long as this input value is unique.
Don't the nonce need to be secret?
No, it doesn't need to be secret. But it cannot be reused. You must not reuse your nonce, because if you reuse your nonce and you have the same counter, then you're going to get the same output from AES, and then you're going to XOR it with plaintext, and you're basically breaking the security. I've got a slide on that actually. So this is a demonstration of what can happen if you do reuse your nonce. So just some terms. I've got PT1 is plaintext of message 1, CT1 ciphertext message 1. N for a nonce, K for key. So what we do, take AES, our key and our nonce and our counter, and we XOR it with our first plaintext, and that gives us our first ciphertext. If we reuse exactly the same key and nonce, but with a second plaintext, okay, we are going to get a different ciphertext output. It's going to be different. But what you can then do is, if someone's eavesdropping this and spots the fact that you've reused your nonce, they can take those two ciphertexts and they can XOR them together. So that gives you this line. So we have our AES of our key and our nonce XORed with our first plaintext, and then we XOR that with the AES of the key and the nonce XORed with our second plaintext. Okay, rearrange that around. Basically, you XORing together AES of the key and the nonce twice. And what happens if you XOR the same number to itself? You get 0. Okay. So that gives you 0 XORed with a plaintext of 1, XORed with a plaintext of 2, which is just the two plaintexts XORed together. That's trivial to break. Okay. When we get to, I've got some activities to do afterwards. So remember that, because that's one of the activities. We're going to demonstrate how you can break AES encryption using this technique. So that was confidentiality. The next thing we need to have is integrity. We need to make sure that the message that we send is the same one that is received. And we can do that with a message authentication code. One of the most popular ones out there is called HMAC. It's a hash-based message authentication code. So this is used in SSL. And it also has a key. It also takes your plain text message, or whatever message, puts it through the Mac algorithm and spits out a short code. And that's like a tag which verifies that message. So what you do is you take your message, you run it through the Mac, get your tag, and you send both to the other party. The other party should have the same key, and they repeat the process. So take the message, put it through the Mac algorithm, and get the Mac out. And then they can compare the two Macs, and if they're the same, then we know that the message is unchanged. And that's how we get integrity.
That key has to be pre-shared somehow, is it?
Sorry, say that again?
The key has to be pre-shared somehow.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you both have to have the same key for this to work. As with encryption and integrity, you have to have the same key. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can get that to happen in a few slides. Right, so we've talked about confidentiality, we've talked about integrity, authentication. So the way we can achieve that is with digital signatures, which I guess probably most of you have heard of. These are asymmetric algorithms. So there are two keys. You have a private key and a public key. The private key must be kept secret. The public key you can stick on the internet, publish it, wherever you like. Doesn't matter. You cannot obtain the private key. If all you know is the public key, you cannot work out what the private key is. It's not true the other way around. If you start with the private key, you can usually work out what the public key is. You can't go public key to private. So it's quite similar to a Mac, really. You take the private key, you take your message, you run it through the algorithm and it spits out the code. That's your signature. You send it with a message, and then anyone with the public key, which you published on the internet so anyone can get it, can verify that the private key that it's associated with was used to create that signature. That's not enough in itself to give us authentication, because you still don't know, okay, there's a public key on the internet, who did it come from? How do I know who it came from? Could have been anyone. So what we do is we take those public keys and we wrap them up in a special file, digital. You've heard of the term digital certificate. It's also called an X509 certificate. It's a particular format of file. And that file, not only does it contain the public key, it also contains details about you, or your website, or wherever it is that you're authenticating. Typically the domain name. www.google.co.uk or whatever it happens to be. All of those details are in the certificate file along with the public key. There are then trusted organisations, certificate authorities, that will, you have to pay them normally, well actually some of them will do it for free, but many you have to pay for. Their job is to verify your identity. You have to prove to them who you are, prove that you are the controller of a particular domain name or whatever. And if you can do that, then they will sign your certificate file with their private key. Now, the certificate authority's public keys are well known. They're in your browser. They're available for download. They're well known, well published. Everybody knows what they are. So as long as you trust your certificate authority, and you trust them to have done their job properly and to have verified the identity of the person who owns the certificate, then you know that a particular public key is owned by a particular domain or a particular person or whatever it is you know. Which I've just said all of that. So putting that in diagram form. So if you've got a user here who wants to be able to prove their identity to people. They create a private key, they create a public key, they send their public key to the certificate authority. The certificate authority will verify their identity, check their documents, check that they own the domain, whatever they have to do to verify their identity. They will sign the certificate file and send it back to this person. So now we have a private key, and we have a public key wrapped up in a certificate signed by a certificate authority that everybody trusts. So this person over here wants to talk to this person over here and wants to authenticate they are who they say they are. So they get hold of a copy of the certificate, they can just ask them to send it to them if they like. That's fine, it's public, doesn't matter. And then user B will send user A a message signed with their private key. And over here, they've got the certificate, they'll verify that it was issued by the certificate authority. And then they can check the signature using the public key and verify that the message was from this person. That's how we do authentication. Okay. So that gives us our three main goals. We've got our confidentiality, we've got our integrity, and we've got our authentication. I've talked a lot about keys. How do you share a key? You can't just stick it out on the internet. Anyone can use it. So your encryption is broken. So somehow you've got to agree keys between two parties. Now you could do that in advance. If you know that you're going to be talking to a particular person, you can in advance say, okay, let's create a key, give it to each other, we've both got it, and now we are able to talk to each other because we've both got the key. Great. It's not really very useful if you're on the internet and you're connecting to a server because you didn't know you were going to connect to that server, and now you need to be able to communicate securely. So how are we going to do that? So what we do is we use a key agreement scheme. There are multiple of these. The one I'm going to describe to you is known as Diffie-Hellman. Because it's quite a simple one, very widely deployed. And there are a couple of variants of this. The one I'm going to describe to you is just the simplest form. So you've got Alice and Bob and they want to share a key. How are they going to do it? So they choose a prime number, call it P. Let's say 23. And we have a base number, G, it's called 5. So those are public. They can be published. Doesn't matter if anyone sees those numbers. Doesn't matter. So Alice chooses a number. A. Let's say A is 4. So she then calculates G to the power of A mod of B. Yes.
Sorry, can the does the base have to be prime, or does it not matter? Okay.
No. There are some requirements on the base, but I'm going to skip over and gloss over those stuff because it's difficult mathsy stuff. But typically these are well known. There are some standard values for P and G, so usually you'll just pick one of the standard ones. So, G to the power of A mod P. So in this case, G was 5, so that's a public number. Take to the power of 4, so 4 is Alice's secret number. 5 to the power of 4, mod 23. That happens to equal 4. You can check that if you like, but trust me, it does. Okay? Now this value can be public. Alice can publish that number. There is a particular problem in maths called the discrete logarithm problem. And it basically says, you can't go from this number backwards to work out what A was. That's a hard problem. Well, actually, when you're talking of a prime number of 23, it's quite an easy problem, because 23 isn't very big. But if P was, you know, a very large number, then that's a hard problem to solve. So Bob does the same thing. So he chooses a secret number, let's call that 3, and he does the same calculation. G to the power of B mod P, which is 5 to the power of 3 mod 23, that happens to equal 10. Okay, so again, you cannot work out that Bob's secret number was 3 if all you know is 10, 23, and 5. You can't do that calculation. So we've worked out these numbers. Alice sends her number 4 to Bob, and Bob sends his number 10 back to Alice. Now, Alice has got everything she needs now. So she works out this sum. G to the power of B to the power of A, mod P. Now, G to the power of B is the thing that Bob just sent her. That's the value, what was it, 10. And A is her secret number. So she knows that this value is 10. She knows what her secret value is 4, so she works out 10 to the power of 4, mod 23, that happens to equal 18. Bob does the same thing, except he's going to work out G to the power of A to the power of B. Well, he knows what G to the power of A is, because Alice just told him, that's 4. And he knows that his secret value is B, that's 3, and he knows what P is. So we work out 4 to the power of 3, mod 23, that equals 18. Okay? So it's the same value on each side. And you can, I mean, just by doing some simple maths, you can see that these two sums are equivalent. So the only things that Alice and Bob have shared are G and P, which are public values, and G to the power of B and G to the power of A, which are can also be public. You cannot work out the secret values from these. Any eavesdropper can look at all of those numbers and will not be able to work out this value 18. Okay? So we have a shared secret between two people that have met each other. That can be the basis of our key. That's what we do. We use Diffie-Hellman, come up with a shared secret. You normally do a little bit of post-processing on that to actually come up with a key, but effectively it's a key agreement. Obviously, I wouldn't recommend you use 23 as your prime if you're going to do this. Typically, you'd use a 2048-bit number as a minimum, probably longer, ideally. So a huge number, yeah.
You said that the P and G as it values are commonly distributed.
Yes.
So if you set up a web server that is going to use those values, but then the automatic security checking websites, they'll tell you that you're meant to generate your own.
You can generate your own.
There is an algorithm for it, is there not? One that you, to generate those G values, you have to do it a few times because it has to agree with a certain condition.
Yeah.
I understand, but why would you do that? What's wrong with the default?
It used to be the case, sort of years ago, that people always generated their own ones. But then we've standardised on particular sets, and so OpenSSL, for example, comes with a set of standard ones. You can, if you wish, generate your own ones, and that's absolutely fine as well. So it's not necessary to create them. Does that answer your question? Okay. So, we've got all our building blocks now to do some secure communication. Okay, so let's put it all together.
So, excuse me.
Yes.
If literally everyone was using the same PNG, would the system still be secure overall?
Yes.
With the only secret being fed in being a little A and a little B.
Yes. Yeah, it's absolutely fine. As long as your key is big enough, then go for it, no problems. So, putting it all together. Hopefully you've all heard of SSL. So that's the S in your HTTPS or whatever. You might not all know that its proper name is actually TLS. Everyone calls it SSL, but its real name is TLS, which is Transport Layer Security. This is a point-to-point encryption protocol. So this is really just securing the link between 2 points. It might be that your message goes further than just across that link. There might be multiple links that it has to traverse. And so you might have multiple of these point-to-point encryptions. And it also may be that you actually want to secure a message across the whole end-to-end of that. TLS doesn't do that for you. There are other standards that will do it. So OpenSSL has one called CMS, Cryptographic Message Syntax Standard. But I'm going to be talking today about TLS. So let's first of all just clear up the SSL TLS thing. Where did that come from? So the first version of SSL was SSL version 2. Obviously. It was released by Netscape in 1994. Okay, there was an SSL version 1, but nobody ever saw it. It was internal to Netscape. They played around with it, realised it was rubbish, and then created SSL v2, and that's what they published. They created another version in 1996 after they realised that the first version that they released, SSL version 2, was just as rubbish as the first one. So SSL v3 was in 1996. At this point, it was being used by more than just Netscape. Netscape, if you don't know, was the forerunner of Mozilla. So Netscape produced, back in those days there was Netscape browser and there was Internet Explorer and a little Mosaic. But Netscape kind of died, and now we have Firefox and Mozilla and that stuff. Anyway, it was decided to standardise it, so the IETF, Internet Engineering Task Force, big standards body, do lots of standardisation work, so they picked it up. And they decided that they couldn't possibly call it SSL because that was a Netscape name. So at that point, it was renamed to TLS, Transport Layer Security. Version 1 was released in 1999. Confuses the hell out of everybody because everyone just calls it SSL and then they get really confused by version numbers and why is version 1 later than version 2 and 3? Which is really annoying, but anyway, there we go. And then there was various updates over time. In 2008 they released TLS version 1.2, and that is today by far the most widely deployed version. If you ever come across one of these in the wild, run away screaming, or yeah, it's totally broken, very dangerous to use. Don't go anywhere near it. This one's also broken, as is this one, yeah, would avoid that one as well. Go for this one as a minimum. That's what everyone is currently using, apart from a few brave souls who are now using the new version, TLSV 1.3, which came out last year. So I implemented that in OpenSSL, so go and have a play if you like. I'm not really going to talk much about that one. I'm going to be focusing on my talk on 1.2 because that's the most widely deployed version. So how does it work? So there's quite a lot of text on this slide. Data is sent around in records, which is basically just an envelope. It's got a header on it which says, here's some data, this is TLS, and it's 1,000 bytes long. And there's the data. That's all the record is. But it has, with it, in that header data, it's got a type. And there's 3 types of data. It's got handshake data, alert data, and application data. So handshake records are used to establish new connections. So this is where we do our key agreement, and we authenticate the parties, and we decide what keys we're going to use, and all those things. That happens in the handshake. And the handshake is basically the first thing that happens when we create a new connection. Alerts are used to send errors when things don't quite go to plan. And then application data is exactly what it sounds like. That's the data from our high-level protocol that we're trying to secure. So when we're sending application data, it's encrypted, and we've got our integrity and all that stuff. So the high-level protocol, typically it might be HTTP. You can use TLS for all sorts of things. Obviously, HTTPS is the one everyone knows about and sees, but it secures loads of things. When we start, we obviously haven't got any agreement on keys and encryption and what stuff. So we start off unencrypted, everything's in plain text, and then we build up our connection, we figure out what our key's in, and then at a certain point we swap over. So that's what a record looks like, that's what's in it. Not a lot of stuff, so we've got the type of the record, what protocol version we're using, the length, and a bunch of data. And this is what a handshake looks like. This is one particular variant of a handshake. You can have slightly different messages and different flows depending on what goes on in the earlier messages, and it might change what happens later on. Yeah, this is essentially how it works. So it's a client-server protocol, so the client starts off, opens the connection to the server. This sits on top of TCP/IP. So we create a TCP connection and send a client hello message. So the client hello basically says, it describes the client's capabilities. It says, I know these encryption algorithms, I know how to authenticate using these other algorithms, I know about these protocol versions, and I've got these other capabilities. And sends all of that over to the server. The server responds with a server hello message, and that basically says, right, okay, so I know that you support TLS 1.2 and TLS 1.1 and 1.0. I also support 1.2, so we're going to use that. And it also does things like, okay, you understand AES, we're going to use AES, and you know Diffie-Hellman, so we're going to do that, and whatever other things it wants to agree. The next message is its certificate. It's X509 certificate, so this is, it will have already got its certificate signed by the certificate authority. It's all part of the server setup and configuration, and it just sends it over to the client. It may also send a server key exchange, so if you're doing Diffie-Hellman for the key agreement, that's where we send over our G to the power A value in the server key exchange. And then the server hello done just says, that's all I've got to send you. The client does the same thing, so it sends a client key exchange back. So again, if we've decided to do Diffie-Hellman as our key agreement, and then it sends its G to the power B over to the server. And at this point, we then see the change cypherspec message, and that is, okay, we've got everything we need to know, we've agreed our keys, I've seen your certificate, and I've authenticated that you are who you are. We've agreed on what encryption algorithm we're going to use. So we've got everything we need. Change cypherspec says, right, go now, we're going to go encrypt it now. And then finally there's a finished message which basically does an integrity check on everything that's happened so far. So obviously all of this is going in plain text. We hadn't agreed our keys previously. So that in theory an attacker could have come along and made modifications to some of these messages and we wouldn't have known, because they weren't integrity check. So we do an integrity check now. We have agreed our keys, we've authenticated, we know who we're talking to. So we do the integrity check and make sure that everything is the same. The server does the same thing, and we basically are checking that everything matches up. Yes?
Can an attacker not potentially modify some of the earlier messages so that the integrity checks would match, but they'd still have access to it?
No. Because we've authenticated who we're talking to, we know that the other party has come up with the same key as we have. If say we're using Diffie-Hellman, if both parties got the same key. If anything had been changed, when we do the integrity check at the end, basically we're going to run an integrity of everything that we've seen. If any differences occur in that, then the integrity value is going to be different. So if we've both got the same key, then we should have the same set of messages. We should have seen all the same messages. And if anything is different, either the key will be different or the integrity value will be different.
So does the integrity check effectively rely on trusting the certificate?
You have to trust the certificate.
Okay.
In this particular example, the most common setup that we have, the client authenticates the server, but the server doesn't authenticate the client. You can run it that this client sends a certificate as well, and it's two-way authentication. But the normal way is you only authenticate one way, because the server doesn't care, actually. It could be anyone, if I care. But if the client does care, I want to make sure that I am talking to this particular server. Okay. So I'm just going to show you the client hello and the server hello, just to give you an idea of what kind of stuff's in it. So the client hello says, this is the maximum version of the protocol that I can talk, TLS 1.2 or whatever. Sends a random value, sends a session ID. So the session ID is useful. You can actually short circuit the handshake, because it's quite expensive to do that initial handshake. There's quite a lot of crypto going on, which can take quite a lot of processing. So we can have this thing called a session where we basically save away all the parameters that we agreed last time, and we can reuse them for a subsequent connection, and it just makes the connection faster. And they're keyed on a session ID. And cipher suites are our list of algorithms that we know about. So for each combination of digital signature algorithm, integrity, encryption, there's like a value which says, if you're going to use AES with RSA signatures and Diffie-Hellman, then there's a value for that. If you're going to use a different encryption algorithm, there's a different cipher suite value, and you have a whole list of them, and the client will send all the ones that it knows about. Skip over compression, that's not really very interesting. And extensions, so over the period of time, new features get added to TLS. TLS is not a static thing. It's changing all the time. People come up with new ideas. We can do this with it, we can do that with it. And they get fitted into this block of extensions which says, I also know about these other features that you can do with TLS. And the server hello is basically the same thing echoed back to the client, except rather than listing all the cipher suites, it says, this is the one we're going to use. And this is the protocol version we're going to use. And it will also echo back extensions based on which ones it thinks are interesting that the client sent to it. That's all I've got to say. So kind of a whistle-stop tour of TLS and crypto. Covered quite a lot of ground. questions? I've completely stunned everyone into silence. Okay, well, I'm going to be sticking around for a while, so you can ask me questions individually if you so wish. I've put some challenges and activities and things together for you to have a go at. So those are the links. So there's basically 4 sort of things you can have a go at. One of them requires Wireshark. If you have Wireshark, then there's a capture file there, and you can go and have a look at the TLS handshake and see what it looks like. And there's a few questions and things where you try and figure out stuff from that capture. If you haven't got Wireshark, don't worry about it. There's some other things that you can be doing. And there's the final question. You're going to get you to crack the encryption, AES encryption on a load of files. And so they're there. Have a go.